Learn English through story. A family function disaster. Rain hammered against the windows of the wedding hall as Amelia stood frozen near the stage, her hands trembling around a silver tray of teacups. Across the crowded room, her Aunt Margaret had just shouted loud enough for every guest to hear. "You have ruined the engagement party!" The music stopped. Forks clinked against plates. Even the children became silent. Amelia wished the polished floor would open beneath her feet and swallow her whole. Her younger cousin Sophie stared at her with wide, watery eyes, while guests whispered behind decorated tables covered in white roses and golden ribbons. No one yet knew the truth. No one understood how one simple family function had turned into complete disaster. But Amelia remembered every detail clearly, and it had all begun earlier that morning. Amelia Bennet lived in a quiet village just outside London with her parents and younger brother Oliver. Their family was not wealthy, but they were respectable and polite people who cared deeply about tradition. That Saturday was extremely important. Her cousin Sophie was becoming engaged to a young solicitor named Daniel Whitmore. The engagement celebration would take place at the Grand Oak Hall, one of the finest event halls in the county. Relatives were traveling from different cities across England to attend. Amelia's mother had repeated the same warning all week. "Please behave properly today," she said while adjusting her pearl necklace. "Your Aunt Margaret notices everything." Everyone in the family feared Aunt Margaret. She was elegant, wealthy, and very proud. She believed family reputation was more important than feelings. Amelia sighed as she looked into the mirror. She wore a pale blue dress that suddenly seemed too plain compared with the expensive gowns hanging in her cousin's wardrobes. "You look lovely," her father said kindly. "That is because you are my father," Amelia replied with a weak smile. Oliver laughed while stuffing biscuits into his pockets. "You worry too much," he said. "Family functions are always boring. Eat cake and survive. That is my strategy." Amelia wished life were that simple. By noon, the Bennet family arrived at Grand Oak Hall. The building looked magnificent. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above marble floors, and waiters carried silver trays through crowded rooms filled with perfume and laughter. Amelia immediately noticed the difference between her family and the others. Her wealthy relatives wore designer clothing and expensive jewelry. Their conversations sounded polished and confident. Aunt Margaret approached like a queen inspecting her kingdom. "There you are," she said sharply. "Amelia, please help the catering staff. And Oliver, do stop touching things." "Yes, Aunt Margaret," Amelia answered politely. Sophie soon appeared beside them, glowing with happiness. She hugged Amelia tightly. "I am so nervous," Sophie whispered. "What if everything goes wrong?" Amelia smiled. "It will be perfect." At that moment, she truly believed it. The first hour passed peacefully. Guests chatted happily while soft piano music played in the background. Elderly relatives discussed politics near the fireplace, while children chased one another between tables. Amelia helped serve tea and cakes. Several guests complimented her manners. Even Aunt Margaret seemed temporarily satisfied. Then Daniel arrived. He entered the hall wearing a dark suit and carrying a bouquet of white flowers for Sophie. Everyone greeted him warmly. Everyone except Amelia. The moment she saw his face, her stomach tightened painfully, because she recognized him. 3 months earlier, Amelia had worked briefly at a small bookshop in town. One rainy evening, she had witnessed Daniel arguing violently with another woman outside the shop. The woman had cried while Daniel angrily pulled papers from her handbag. Amelia remembered hearing the woman say, "You promised you would not leave me." At the time, Amelia had ignored the incident, but now Daniel was preparing to marry her cousin. Her mind became filled with questions. Was the woman his former girlfriend? Had Sophie known about her? Should Amelia say something? As the evening continued, Amelia tried convincing herself to remain silent. Perhaps she had misunderstood. Perhaps it was none of her business. But then she noticed Daniel behaving strangely. He constantly checked his telephone. Twice, he stepped outside the hall, looking nervous. And during dinner, Amelia accidentally overheard part of a conversation between Daniel and his friend near the garden doors. "She still keeps calling me," Daniel muttered angrily. His friend lowered his voice. You should have settled things before today. Amelia's heart pounded. Something was terribly wrong. Later that evening, Sophie disappeared into the dressing room upstairs to prepare for the official engagement announcement. Meanwhile, guests gathered near the stage, holding glasses of champagne. Aunt Margaret proudly stood beside Daniel. "My daughter has chosen an excellent husband," she announced. Suddenly, Amelia noticed movement near the entrance hall. A woman stood there, soaked from the rain. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her eyes burned with fury. She looked directly at Daniel. The entire room became tense. Daniel turned pale. "Oh no," he whispered. The woman marched forward. "You lied to me!" she shouted. Gasps filled the hall. Aunt Margaret stepped forward immediately. "Excuse me, who are you?" The woman ignored her. She pointed directly at Daniel. "You told me you loved me. You promised we would marry." Sophie slowly descended the staircase upstairs just in time to hear those words. The color disappeared from her face. "Daniel?" she whispered. The room exploded into chaos. Relatives began whispering loudly. Someone dropped a wine glass. Children stared in confusion while guests moved closer to hear the argument. Daniel tried calming the woman. "Rebecca, please," he begged quietly, but Rebecca refused to stop. "You were still seeing me last month," she cried. "You used me." Sophie's hands trembled against the staircase railing. Amelia felt sick. This was becoming a nightmare. Aunt Margaret suddenly turned towards Amelia. "You!" she snapped. "You knew something, didn't you?" Amelia froze. I was not certain. You should have said something earlier." The accusation struck Amelia like a slap. Around the room, relatives stared at her. Some looked shocked, others looked disappointed. Sophie burst into tears and ran upstairs. Daniel followed her desperately. Rebecca stood crying near the entrance while rainwater spread across the polished floor beneath her shoes. And in the center of it all stood Amelia, feeling responsible for the disaster. The engagement party ended early. Guests left awkwardly in silence. Waiters quietly cleared untouched desserts from tables, while decorations hung sadly beneath dim lights. Amelia helped collect empty glasses without speaking. Her mother approached gently. "You were trying to protect Sophie," she said softly. "But I failed." "No," her father replied firmly. The truth would always appear eventually. Amelia looked towards the staircase where Sophie had disappeared earlier. She felt terrible guilt. Yet deep inside, she also knew something important. Sometimes silence creates even greater pain than honesty. 3 weeks later, Sophie visited Amelia's house unexpectedly. Amelia nervously invited her inside for tea. "I suppose you hate me," Amelia said quietly. Sophie looked surprised. "Hate you? Why?" "Because I ruined your engagement." Sophie slowly shook her head. "No, Daniel ruined it." For the first time in weeks, Amelia relaxed slightly. Sophie stared thoughtfully through the window. "At first I blamed you," she admitted honestly. "But then I realized you were frightened too." Amelia nodded. "I did not know what to do." "You should have told me," Sophie said gently. "But I understand why you stayed silent." The cousins sat quietly for a moment before Sophie finally smiled. "Next family function," she said. "Let us hope nobody arrives dramatically in the rain." Amelia laughed for the first time since the disaster. And although the memory of that terrible evening would remain with the family for years, it also taught them something valuable. Perfect appearances can hide painful truths. And sometimes the most difficult conversations are the ones that must happen soonest.